Hi. Today we're doing criminals or crime and criminals. There'll be 10 questions to answer. I will try to get you. We're going to just look at some pictures of the bad guys. I'm going to try to get that to you. If I don't, you're not going to miss anything in all reality because nothing on the test or anything from this. It's just basically was filler at the end of class. So there, I told you that's just the truth. Trying to keep them occupied. So if I can figure out how to get it to you, I will. All right, here we go. All right. How about crime and criminals? Crime had always been around, obviously. Okay, and it didn't really pick up during the Great Depression anymore for the average person. But what did happen was organized crime kind of got a toehold on some things. Because anytime you make something illegal, it doesn't mean people don't want it or think they need it. It just means someone's got to find an alternative way to get it to you. And that's where crime comes in, unfortunately. So that's where a lot of it gets started, running bootlegging, illegal liquor, stuff of that nature. And then, of course, it moves into other stuff, bank robberies, things like that. And that's what we're going to talk about. Okay? So it says, did crime increase during the Great Depression? At first, you would think that the tough times of the Great Depression would cause people to turn to crime. However, that wasn't necessarily the case. What do you think? Why do you think that might have been? What do you think, Van?
Because everyone's broke and they need food and they're starving. So
People are hurting already, and they're probably like, well, who am I going to rob? I mean, seriously. People are hurting, so they're not going. Probably people with good consciences is not going to try to steal someone that is already doing without. So I think so. The average crime, people against just ordinary people, wasn't so much. Although there aren't a lot of crime statistics from that era, most historians agree that the crime rates probably did not increase during the Great Depression. Some even suggest that crime went down. And it might have been because so many people, as Van said, were hard up. They were less likely to steal from each other because no one had anything. Yeah, no one had anything. You know. Now, crime in the movies. Crime became somewhat glorified in the movies at the start of the Great Depression. Gangster movies like Scarface and The Public Enemy made a criminal out to be this really cool guy. It was a great way to make a living, you know. So it kind of glorified the bad guys. So in 1934, the government actually passes new laws that put restrictions on movies. And one of the rules was that movies could not make criminals look like the heroes. Think about, we talk in the Old West, we talk about the dime store novels that you could buy back east.
What about Robin Hood?
Jesse James out to be this Robin Hood type of guy. He was just a great, great guy in all the little books. But in all reality, he was a cold-blooded killer he didn't rob from the rich and give to the poor. He robbed from the rich and kept it. Or he just robbed from everybody and kept it. He wasn't looking to take care of anybody else. He was taking care of Jesse James.
And people think that he just after he took from he left them alone. Like when they would rob chains, they would shoot like pretty much everyone.
Yeah. He was a cold-blooded killer, just like most of them at the time was. Okay. So it didn't allow them to look like heroes. Okay. In fact, there was a movie, and we'll pull up it shows you the poster. An actor named James Cagney starred in a movie, and it might have been 1934, 1935, somewhere, where he was this criminal, head of a mob, whatever, and he finally gets caught. But the whole movie, he is just like really cool, and he's this little tough guy, and he wasn't afraid of anybody, and even after he gets arrested and he gets put in prison, he's still the tough guy, and he won't break. And at the end of the movie, a priest is talking, because he's on death row, and they're going to execute him, take him to the electric chair. And the priest talks to him and says, young criminals in here are looking up to you, and they're gonna end up just like this because of you. So he, he does the, as they're leading him into the, where the electric chair is.
They make you feel
He
bad.
he has this total meltdown and starts screaming, "No, please, please, don't kill me, don't kill," and so it kind of tarnishes his,
Tough guy.
his tough guy image a little bit there. So, but that's how they got around it. So there, remember we talked about there's ways around everything. So the whole movie makes him out to be this really cool little tough guy, wasn't afraid of anything. But at the end, he has this total meltdown that he doesn't want to die.
I would
Okay.
be a was too.
Yes, Caleb.
Back then, did they give you whatever you wanted for your last meal?
I feel confident they did. I don't know that for a fact, but I think that was just kind
I
of
would
like
order like a whole bunch of stuff and take
Yeah,
it.
I would-
Stuff and then-
Yeah, I would never run out of food. I would just eat until, I popped.
I went to
All right.
the
I know, I just eat.
Now then,
No, I would eat until I get a heart attack and die.
all right. No, organized crime leaders. Shh, I hear myself. I should not hear you. I never hear you. You ever notice that? You never interrupt.
Is there a timer
Okay.
for how long you get to eat?
Organized crime leaders and bank robbers often made the front page news. Many criminals became very famous during the Great Depression. In some cases, people looked at them as heroes. This was especially true with the bank robbers because, think about this, many people blamed the greedy banks for the Great Depression. Remember, they shut the banks up, took their money, then they couldn't pay their mortgage, they took their house. So they're not fans of banks. So when people are robbing the few banks that are still open, people are like, yeah, way to go. They're all for it because they don't like the banks. And their money is not in there anymore, so they don't care. Okay, it's not hurting them. So they're blaming the banks for the Great Depression. So when they get somebody robs one of them, a lot of people are making these guys out to be heroes. Okay, some of the famous ones was Al Capone. Everybody's heard of Al Capone. He was responsible for the St. Valentine Day massacre and the whole bit. He was an organized crime boss in Chicago. He became rich providing illegal alcohol during Prohibition. And they estimated, I forget what it was, he was like $60,000 a month or something like that. They estimated he was bringing in. Yeah, that's a lot now, $60,000 a month. I mean, come on, that's like boatload of money for this
Dude,
day.
that's more than the average American makes in a
A
year.
year, exactly. Yeah.
And think about it.
And the thing about minimum wage was, well, they wasn't a minimum wage, but in 1930, minimum wage was 25 cents an hour. So, yeah, 60,000.
And think about that's the 1930s,
Okay.
and that's 60,000.
All right. So, but many people thought of Capone as a Robin Hood type of guy too, because he gave to charities, he helped the poor,
Because he stole.
but he was, and they could never pin anything on him.
They couldn't.
Because he was a smart head of the mob, I guess. He had other people do the dirty work, and they could never trace it back to him. What they got him for, and he ends up going to prison, and he's sentenced to 11 years, he serves 8. Tax evasion. He's not paying taxes on all of his illegal money he's getting.
Wow.
So they finally are able to track him down, and they get him for tax evasion. That's how they put him in jail.
It's much more.
The most things you can call a man for.
Yeah, not all the other illegal stuff, but for tax evasion. That's how they
And
get Al
think
Capone.
about all the money he had. Why didn't he
Oh,
just
yeah.
pay his taxes?
Well,
Because then they can trace it back to him.
yep.
Once
All
he
right.
pays the tax.
Now, Bonnie and Clyde was another one. It was Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barlow. They actually grew up together in a small Texas town. I don't know. I guess maybe they were boyfriend, girlfriend. Something went unraveled with them though, and they go on a robbery killing spree out through the Midwest down into Louisiana, and they're almost. It's like they've got this route that they run. But no one picks up on it, and they can't catch them. And they've got people helping them along the way. Because, again, they're made out to be these heroes. They're back again. They were cold-blooded killers. I mean, they would just shoot you down, kill people for no reason. And they would rob gas stations, banks, any stores. I mean, they would just, whatever they wanted, they just went in and took it. And the way they finally got them was the governor of Texas at this point in time had done away with the Texas Rangers because they were considered too brutal and out of control for to handle the criminals. I know. But they bring one of these guys back out of retirement, and Frank, and I cannot remember his last name. It'll come to me. But they bring him out of retirement.
Is this a ranger?
And he was the Texas Ranger, and he was one of the biggest, baddest, toughest Texas Rangers there was. But he was smart, and he starts looking at where they've hit, and he's noticing that they're almost running a route over time, and he starts pinpointing where they just hit and where they're going to be, and he just barely misses them like twice. He shows up and they've just hit this area. So he knows he's on the right trail. So he ends up, he gets them he's in Louisiana when he finally catches up with them. And he has one of their trusted people, and of course he's got all the local cops and all this stuff around too to help him out at this point in time. But this guy pulls over to the side of the road because Bonnie and Clyde knows him. And he's acting like he has a flat tire. And they come up and they stop, and that's when all the officers steps out, and one of them makes a move like they're going for their gun, and they open fire on the car, and that's the end of Bonnie and Clyde. Okay, so they were gunned down in 1934. Okay, then you had John Dillinger. He was a famous bank robber during the Great Depression, and many people, again, looked at him as a hero because he was a bank robber. Okay, he and his gang robbed at least 24 banks before he was gunned down in 1934. Starting to see a pattern here. 1934 was not a good year for criminals, apparently.
Why do you think that is?
So I think they just tightened down. I think you upped the enforcement. You had more FBI agent, G-men out looking for them. And I think they probably, if you got by with robbing 24 banks, you'll probably start getting a little careless. You're thinking that you're not going to get caught, and you start messing up. And a lot of it's just probably good police work, like the Texas Ranger that figured out the Bonnie. Bonnie and Clyde, this was not just it lasted a month. This was a couple year thing that they were doing. They were big time for a while, and no one had ever figured it out, what they were up to, until this guy came along and kind of pieced it together. Okay, and so he, I don't know if it was like every week, but it was a continuous trek, But he learned everything he could about them. He went to their hometown and talked to people who didn't want to talk to him because, again, in their hometown, they were considered heroes. So, but the press left out the part where they would just gun people down in cold blood. They didn't leave. They made it out to like they were just this,
These people
this loving couple that was just Great Depression. They was just trying to, they make them out to be heroes, and the truth is, they're not. They're criminals. They're criminals. Okay.
Wait.
Yes.
Isn't it a mugshot? Isn't that once you get captured?
Yes.
So he got captured in 1929, but
Yep.
escaped.
Well, he probably didn't escape. It depends on what they got him for. Again, if they didn't get him for bank robbery, they couldn't make it stick.
Yeah.
He walks out, who knows. Other famous Depression-era criminals included Pretty Boy Floyd, Babyface Nelson. I want to show you some pictures of them, and you're going to go, really? Where did those names come from?
Yeah.
Because Pretty Boy was not, and Babyface, he was young. That's where the Babyface, he was a younger, Baron Lamb, Slick Willie Sutton. Oh, Slick Willie, that's, you know,
But then he
Yeah.
escaped from the
okay.
Yeah, because
They might have, I don't know where the nickname Slick came from. Maybe he was just smooth, you know, I don't know. The start of Prohibition in the 1919 prevented people from selling and transporting alcohol. And this law, of course, gives rise to the new class of criminals called bootleggers. We've already talked about that. And they made their money, of course, smuggling liquor. Okay? And although Prohibition ended in 1933, by this point in time, the criminals had their toehold on things. So they still ran illegal alcohol businesses. Okay, they were still in place. And of course, they do move on to other ventures, gambling houses, which was illegal, drugs, the same things that you face, unfortunately, today in society was going on in the 1933. They had gambling house, what they called a gambling house. It was illegal. Gambling was illegal. But they had places set up.
So they weren't gambling for houses.
No. They would come in and gamble, play poker. They had roulette wheels. It was basically little casinos
Yeah.
set up in these nightclub type places.
I thought you.
And the
thought you
reason-
said gambling for
Okay,
houses.
no. And the reason they had these places, and the reason these places are illegal is, again, you're not paying taxes on it. Okay? If you won $500, then you just put $500 in your pocket. You didn't run and go, oh, Mr. Government, I won $500, here's your share. You know, you didn't do that. You put it in your pocket. Well, the guys who was running this were making, big money, because the house usually wins. So they were making big money, and they weren't paying taxes on it. That's why it's illegal. Same way with illegal alcohol, bootlegging. That's why bootlegging was illegal. The government didn't care that it might cause you to go blind because of the way it was made. They cared about the fact taxes wasn't getting paid on it. Okay, that's why they didn't like it. Okay, because bootlegging went on long after the Great Depression ended and Prohibition is lifted. You still had bootleggers. I grew up
And moonshine.
in moonshine country. People still ran moonshine. And the reason it was illegal was simply because they didn't pay taxes on it.
Especially in
That's why they sent out G-men, Treasury men, the T-men, excuse me. That's why they sent out T-men. They sent Treasury after, the Treasury Department went after them. It wasn't the FBI looking for bootleggers, it was the tax man. That's who was after them.
I find that hilarious.
Okay? All right. So, organized crime had become a major problem in the 1920s due to Prohibition. Even after Prohibition ended in 1933 is when Prohibition ended, the gangs that formed and were still around, and they continue to operate, but in different areas, again, such as gambling, drugs, things of that nature. Okay? Now, you also had some crowd violence going on. Crowd violence and mobs were a problem in the early part of the Great Depression. There was a clash between police and communist marchers in New York in 1933. There was also, and this is kind of sad, there was food riots, okay, that occurred in many cities in the 1930s and 1931s because people were hungry. They were hungry. In 1932, during World War I, the veterans were promised so many years after the end of the war that they would receive a bonus check from the government for serving their country well. Well, it came time to get that bonus check. We're in the middle of the Great Depression, and guess what?
And
There's no bonus check. Well, these guys don't like that, so they marched on Washington, and they were called, it was a bunch of World War I veterans, and they were called the Bonus Army. And they marched on Washington, D.C., asking for their bonus pay. There's about 20,000 of them. And when President Hoover, he just had them removed. Okay?
What do you mean
So
by removed?
he had them removed by force. He had the police officers break it up and force them out. or Secret Service or whoever. And several was injured or killed during this time. The crowd violence eased once FDR becomes president. And these guys never did get their bonus money, by the way. Okay. So, interesting and fun facts about illegal activities of the 1930s. Congress actually passed a number of federal crime laws in the early 1930s in order to help the FBI to capture criminals such as John Dillinger. One of the most famous crimes of the Great Depression was, of course, the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh's baby son.
Who's Charles Lindbergh?
I don't know.
That's you and I here when we did that. We just kind of talked about him in class. He flew from New York to Paris. He's the first guy to go from New York across the Atlantic
It was
Ocean
Amelia
in a
Earhart.
single.
Did Amelia
That's
Alright,
my
fine.
gun wool.
She was not the first, Leo. Okay, Charles Lindbergh was the first. And he became famous because of the flight and all this stuff. And he and his wife had a baby, and this guy kidnapped him. Okay, and that became a very famous, it's one of the most famous. He did.
The baby did.
If you remember, we talked about this. The
No,
kid,
Dad.
doesn't it make you feel good? Previous learning, and it's like the first time they've ever heard it. Okay? The kidnappers left a note asking for $50,000. Lindbergh actually paid the ransom. Okay, he paid the ransom. Unfortunately, they did not get the child back, and he was found dead 2 months later.
It's just horrid. Why? It's just sick.
It's sad.
Joe
Okay.
Biden.
Yeah, this folk singer wrote a song during the Great Depression. He wrote a song called Pretty Boy Floyd, and he actually compares banks and bank robbers. Okay? The banks and the outlaws. He kind of, in the song, is basically, the banks are the bad guys too. So that doesn't help, when you got other entertainers that are kind of painting them out to be good guys. Girlfriends of famous gunmen and outlaws were called gun moles.
See, Ben,
Okay.
you're my gun
That's
wool.
what they called them. The gangsters Al Capone, okay, the reason that a lot of people liked Al Capone was he started one of the first soup kitchens in Chicago to help feed the hungry.
That's actually pretty. He donated.
He actually, all his money was ill-gotten goodies, but he actually gave back to the community.
He was actually kind of proud.
Yeah, he actually gave back to the community.
to be honest-
to be an illegal type of guy
He gives more money than
was
some of the-
responsible for probably a number of deaths and things, people being gunned down in illegal activities. Yeah,
I mean,
He
we
gave more than most like death.
he attempted to do
when you
some
think
good.
about it,
All
he
right,
sold the liquor.
thanks, bye.
Joe.